All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Mark Wolf. I discovered the grand unified theory of game design. The basic primer is in the description below. And in this video, we are going to be talking about the topic of a real game requiring strategy to win. This gets more into the advanced topics of game design, and it's a little more complex. But again, we're going to try and make this easy with examples and kind of boiling things down to their most essential parts. So, at its core, the idea that a game requires strategy to win relates back to the concept of a competition. And everything leading up to this, of course, being fair and balanced, and competitions being players utilizing limited resources to achieve conflicting goals. Now you have to make sure, like we've said numerous times before, that all of that needs to lead to a choice of strategy, a way that the player chooses to utilize those limited resources to approach that competition and to compete in that competition. Although for definitions, I know it's bad form to use the word in the definition part, but so to get to some examples here, because I just want to get right into this. So you could take, like we've done before, the example of Magic the Gathering, where actually, you know what? No, we've done Magic too much. Let's get to something else. Let's maybe go back to Zelda. So we have the difference between kind of this ideal Zelda where you can choose your strategy and the dungeons are dynamic and multifaceted, and the world is dynamic, and you can approach those challenges as they arise based on the strategy you want to choose. And then compare it to something like maybe Ocarina of Time. And in this same topic, actually, the exact same thing happens in Super Mario. And this is where you turn the dungeon, instead of a competition where you have to apply a strategy to those limited resources in that competition, into a sequence of actions that get you from point A to point B. And in this regard, Zelda and Mario are exactly the same thing, or at least the example we're using is like Ocarina of Time, or I think Link to the Past, I think, also does this. So you have a set of very specific things you need to do in order to progress through that gauntlet. And instead of applying a strategy, what the game or the not game is forcing you to do is engage in a memory exercise. So although it may look like Mario and Zelda are very different games, or again, sorry, Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time and Super Mario, like Game Boy Mario, are actually kind of the same thing. It's more or less just going through and memorizing exactly what you need to do at each and every step. And this means that there is really no strategy. Some games are very clever at hiding this. I think Metroid, the original NES Metroid, and Super Metroid too for Super Nintendo, they do some very, very, very cool things. There's a lot of great ideas that are just starting to bubble to the surface, but it gets bogged down in just a lot of these design conventions that arise out of an ad hoc industry that doesn't know exactly what it's doing. And it just kind of creates, just torture chambers for players. You're going to get slapped on the wrist every time you go down the wrong path. And you won't feel like you're getting the cheese at the end until you do everything in exactly the right order. And you feel like you're accomplished when you're able to get through that challenge in exactly the right sequence. But that's not really a game. There's no competition. There's no way for you to compete. There's nothing like there's no interchange between a CPU enemy and an opposing player or a cooperating player. There's really no way to do that. It sometimes gives you the illusion of those things, but like with a lot of beat 'em up games, like old, Sega or Super Nintendo beat 'em up games, it gives you the illusion of cooperation, but what you're actually doing is you're both just engaging in that memory exercise. That's it. You're just simultaneously doing that. It feels like you have agency. It feels like you're cooperating because you're both focused on doing the same thing. You're both getting to press buttons, right? Well, not really. I mean, yes, you are getting to do those things, but none of your decisions matter because there is only the decision that is already set out for you if strategy is not required for the game. It's not a game if strategy is not required. So you can contest this with Mage War, or because a lot of people don't know what Mage War is. Let's say like an ideal version of Magic the Gathering. If Magic the Gathering was a real game, then the idea is you can go through the card pool, pick out what strategy you want to play, optimize it as best you can, and perhaps targeting, a specific tournament meta. If there's some kind of, data you can look over for that might be useful, or just to whatever format meta there is. Although I guess that maybe this is saying there shouldn't be format meta, so maybe just restricting it to tournament meta. But the idea is that you can take all of those limited resources that the card pool presents to you, and you can construct your own approach. You can construct your own goals for how to deploy those resources and actions that you're planning to take in piloting that strategy to achieve victory. And in a lot of MMOs too, we come back to the same thing. This is kind of like, basically every MMO just gives you the illusion that this is happening, but then takes all of that agency away from you. So like World of Warcraft is kind of presenting you with all of these options and saying, ooh, look at all these shiny options, but they're not really options because there isn't strategy required if the game is solvable. Just like with Magic. That was an ideal, hypothetical version of Magic that doesn't exist. The real version of Magic, the one that we all have, is completely solvable. So, I mean, I guess technically speaking, you can make whatever strategy you want, but those strategies aren't viable in the game. You're going to lose if you just simply play what strategy you like best. Like, let's say you particularly like, I don't know, what's some odd, like thralls. I don't know, is that too alienating? A thrall example? Unicorns. Let's say you're a big fan of unicorns. There are probably not a lot of good unicorn cards in Magic. I would just venture to guess there is not a tournament viable unicorn deck in any format in Magic. If there is, somebody please prove me wrong. I'd be curious to see that. But let's just say, maybe even regardless of creature type, not every strategy is viable in Magic the Gathering. And That, or actually, you know what? Let me reword that. So in Magic the Gathering, certain strategies are favored over others. That's the correct terminology. Because actually, in a real game, there are non-viable strategies. You can deploy those resources less skillfully. You can have a bad strategy, but in a real game, you have the freedom to do that. And your skill in in customizing your strategy is part of what allows you to achieve victory. But it's not a memory exercise. It's not it's not a sport. It doesn't depend on you know, how much memory you have in your brain or how much muscles you have on your arms or how fast you are. It is entirely dependent on your ability to just understand the game and make strategic choices and make the most impactful strategic choices. And the more experience you have playing the game, the better you are at that. Or, you know, maybe you start with a very just intuitive comprehension of that, which would be great. But a game allows for all types and it makes it viable for all types. All people in a real game can be equally competitive. Or I guess, let's say theoretically equally competitive. Maybe not just on their first game. Maybe some players are starting out better than others, but everyone with varying levels of practice, let's say, is entirely tournament viable. You can compete, you can become competitive. Nothing is preventing you in the design of a real game from being competitive. So I guess the final topic I want to come back to here is the topic of grind, because this is really, now that we're at the requiring strategy to win, this is a really good way to understand the topic of grind again. Because, like I said before, grind lacks competition. So there is no strategy required to win because you're not competing. Let's just take a really straightforward example, like in World of Warcraft or in EverQuest, Asheron's Call, Ultima Online. Take whatever MMO you want. You have a kill quest. You've got to kill a certain number of low-level, low-risk monsters. And the only reason is because the game is determined that killing this certain number is something you should be rewarded for completely arbitrarily. There's no reason for it. There's no competition. It doesn't require you to customize your strategy. It doesn't require you to make strategic choices. Your enemy, your opponent is not doing that either. They have you and them have less agency because in kill quests like that, the low level monsters you're killing really can't win. I mean, there are some examples where if you get into a bad situation and you just, you know, are being absent-minded, you can get in a situation where you are overwhelmed. But those situations are also kind of out of the control of the player too. And I think those also, you know, part of bad design, because I think those are, you know, a lot of those are intentionally designed. And again, too, that doesn't require any strategy. That's just having a random outcome. And that also means that you've removed strategy. And so let's see here. What are some other examples? Here's a weird one, and we're going to come back to this when we talk about randomness. But there's an interesting example with Kirby Air Ride for Nintendo GameCube. And Kirby Air Ride's city mode is basically, it's a multiplayer mode and everyone's on a glider and there's a city and there's other better gliders scattered throughout so you can choose a different one. And there's a whole bunch of power-ups and power-downs that you can get either intentionally or accidentally to customize the stats of your glider. And then at the end of this city mode, it's like a timed city mode, then there's a set of random mini games to play. Now, that's a really simple design, and it seems kind of nonsensical that it's set up that way because it seems so obvious that it's much more meaningful to players if you were to tell them what those mini games were up front. But the way the game is designed, you go through the city mode, you customize your glider, not knowing what mini games you're going to face. And then when you get there, the glider you've designed may be completely inadequate for what the thing is supposed to be. And so there is no strategy anymore required to win those things. Now, winning those things is completely random. Or I guess random depending on whether you vary your strategy in each city mode. So not only is it random, it's also now conditional. And so, yeah, again, it would just be really simple and easy. I mean, there's a bunch of other things you'd have to do, but just this one thing, you wouldn't even, I mean, without even giving players the choice of which mini games they were going to play. Like, we're not even giving players that much agency yet. It's still just a better game if you put the random mini game choices at the beginning of City Trial. That's it. You just put them at the beginning. The game makes its little roll and it figures out which 3 mini games you're going to play, and it tells all 3 players or all 4 players or however many you have, hey, these are the mini games you're going to play at the end of City Trial. So you should build your glider to face these trials. And then players would know what they're building towards. They'd have a goal. Then you'd have to make sure that the mini games allowed for customization of strategy. The way they are, they don't really. There's very specific things that you need to do. So like I said, there's a whole lot of other things you need to fix about Kirby Air Ride, but just that one thing, is a very simple fix. And a lot of things in game design are complicated, but sometimes it seems like fixing games is a big deal. And sometimes it's not, sometimes it's just these little things, like when you do certain things, the sequencing of certain things. Like just a simple thing like putting the randomness of the mini games before the city trial. That alone gives players more agency. So that's it here for this topic. I'm sure there's a whole lot more that I wanted to say and forgot, but we'll get to those in future videos. We'll keep going here. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.